television.
TV worth watching, IPTV.
Acquisition of this program was made possible by Friends of Iowa Public Television.
It has taken a while, but the 1992 presidential campaign now has the requisite sex scandal story. The subject of the story is Arkansas Governor Bill Clinton, the Democratic front-runner. Clinton is alleged to have had a 12-year affair with a former nightclub singer who is now an Arkansas state employee. Clinton says the story is not true. True or false? Is Clinton headed for a Gary Hart freefall here, Juan?
Well, I think Clinton may be hot under the collar, but certainly the death march has started through the snowy woods of New Hampshire. It's all up to how Clinton handles himself in the coming hours. The key here is that there's no ongoing affair. I think the American people are kind of angry at the kind of sexual politics, kind of, you know, you have to behave in this way, Mr. Clinton, to be president. People have had enough of that, I think.
Charles?
But I don't think it's a sex story anymore. I think it's a truth story. There are tapes out there, and if it turns out that Clinton is lying or if he tried to get someone else to tell a lie, I think he's finished.
Nina?
I think Charles is right about that, but here we are all talking about the journalistic wonderworks of the Star, a journal that paid many thousands of dollars for a story, that has played one section of a tape for reporters, and that section of a tape did not, in fact, match the quotes that are in the Star. It makes me very nervous as a reporter.
Evan?
Well, maybe he's being set up here, but there's a steady kind of drip-drip effect. And, you know, most people don't know who Clinton is. The first thing they're going to learn about him is see some guy who's rumored to have had a 12-year affair with a cabaret singer.
Who works for the state of Arkansas.
That interferes with getting your message out, to put it mildly.
Now, this publication we're talking about, this is what you see at the supermarket at the checkout counter. You know, Elvis made love to Loch Ness Monster 3 times, exclusive photos. I mean, this is the kind of journalism we're talking about, you know. The quote, legitimate press gets into this reluctantly. Now, the Post has buried the story, at least it did on Friday, and the Times, you know, it buried it. But it'll be on the front page pretty soon. You know, we pretend we don't want to talk about this sleazy stuff, but in fact we do, and here we are talking about it.
Well, there's a real paradox here. I mean, after all, this is a country that had just started out handing out condoms to teenagers, and at the same time is shocked that a young and handsome governor might be acting a little bit like John F. Kennedy. And the paradox is that as a society, we individually become permissive sexually. We seem to be becoming extremely puritanical about our politicians. Now, Clinton, I think, had an inkling of this, and he wanted to put a stop to it and say, look, I'm not going to be nailed like Gary Hart. I'm going to say I'm not going to discuss this. And I think if he had stuck with that, he might have succeeded. People would have said, look, it's none of our affair. It's not important. Let's let it go. But the problem is he's now denied it. You can't say at the one time, I will not discuss it, and also I deny it. If he denies it, well, now there's an issue of truth, and I think he could be nailed on that.
Well, that's the denial is the key, because
exactly.
then you have a question of truth, but there are other issues that come into play as well, because the woman was then given a job in state government. People want to know exactly how much is true, what are on the tapes, and it just invites more inquiry, and at this point, he can't stop the inquiry.
Now, you say the public's getting sick of this. How do you know?
No, I don't think there's any question. If you go out right now, talk to even his opponents, the other people on the campaign trail, what they're saying is, look, you know, we don't think that this is something terrible, that this is, he was in town this week at the mayor's conference over at the National Association of Manufacturers or whatever, and what you hear in the audience is, look, you know, that's not a reason that we can't have this man run for president. They want to give it to him at this point. So many people in the Democratic Party want to anoint one of the Democrats as the nominee.
Yeah, but suppose 80% of the American public forgives him, or says it's no problem. You still got 20% that doesn't forgive him. That's enough to lose an election in a big way.
And a key point you made earlier is the first time that the American people have come to know this man, given his low name ID status, is around this issue.
Well, the other thing they'll know about him is that he was executing somebody in Arkansas. Nobody ever even paid any attention to that. On the day this story was really beginning to break open, he was executing personally by phone, giving the word to execute someone in Arkansas, and nobody even noticed.
What about Charles's theory that if you just say, look, I won't discuss it, and that's the end of it. It'll go away.
Well, as the only female on this panel, let me say that I don't know if that would work or not. And I said last week here that the American voter has to grow up a little bit and understand that politicians are human too. Having said that, though, I think there is some feeling, particularly among women voters, that particularly lots and lots of women, if we have a woman a week here, if that's what we're talking about in the last analysis, it says something about the way a man views a woman if he just as soon sleep with a different one as have another hamburger.
But I think if Clinton had said, I will not discuss it, there may have been things in my past, and he did, he's hinted about that. He said the marriage wasn't a great one, there were problems early on, but now everything is okay. I think he might have tried to set a new standard, a post-Gary Hart standard, which is if things happen in the past, that's okay, and now if nothing's happening now, let's let it go. I think that standard might have stuck, but I think he now has climbed down by saying, I deny this. Now he has to be held accountable.
You know, he hasn't quite
on this
denied
particular
it.
issue.
He hasn't quite denied it. If you listen to his denials, he doesn't say he never had an affair. He says the story's not true.
Yeah.
And that
Well, he
she
may just mean that some aspects
Yeah.
of the story aren't true.
And that she
he didn't sleep
accepted
with
money,
her for 12 years. He slept with her a
And
couple
she
of
has
times.
previously denied the story. She once threatened to sue a local station for air.
They still have a chance. Mrs. Clinton is a great asset. I mean, she's a really attractive, formidable woman. And if they go on the tube together and they do say, yeah, our marriage has had problems, and yeah, I even slept with this girl. I didn't do it for 12 years, but I did sleep with her.
Well,
but the fact
so
is
then
we got a great marriage.
here's the problem. Once he says, I did sleep with this woman, then the question comes, well, did you sleep with other people? And now we come into the real issue here, which is the American voters looking at the issue of character. What kind of man is this? And people making judgments about him based on this issue. The problem, if I'm the political consultant running Clinton's campaign, I say, oh my God, how do we get this elephant out of the room so we can get on with it?
Well, and that's where Charles is right, in a way, because the minute he says, all right, I won't discuss it, but I'll tell you, not this one, there's always going to be another one.
What's your call on this? Is he finished? Or you think, Evan, that maybe he's got
I
a
think
shot?
there's an inevitability. I'm afraid to say I do think he's finished. I think he's got a shot, but it's not a great one. I think the odds are against him. And I think there's kind of an inevitability of it just dripping out slowly. Some other girl appears.
And the Democrats are in a panic, because if you take out Clinton, who's left? This is a very, very unremarkable, weak field.
And there are three of them who have privately at least been talking about possibly getting back in.
But the
Nunn
problem
and
about
Ford
getting
and
in,
Cuomo's.
the problem about getting in now is the political calendar. If you try to declare it today, you cannot enter any of the Super Tuesday primary states. No
You got until
Texas,
Tuesday
no
to get
Florida.
into Illinois. I mean, it's
Right,
just
but that
barely
Illinois, yeah, but
continuing.
the big one is California. See, somebody saying, look, I got California at the end, and I'm bringing that to the convention, has a lot of leverage going in, and that's the scenario that can bring a Gore or maybe a Cuomo back in the game. But to tell you the truth, I don't think it's very attractive at this point because you can't build the campaign apparatus that would take you into the general.
And you don't even compete for a third of the delegates.
So you're saying there's an outside chance we could have a real political convention?
Well, it'd be a terrific convention in the sense that it would be chaotic and Gordon would be there every night. I mean, you'd be madness. But in terms of beating George Bush, the Democrats are in trouble again.
And it shows the risk of the front loading of these primary elections, because if you have a train wreck like you're having now with Clinton, it does not leave the party a chance to recover.
Well, we've kicked the Democrats and Bill Clinton around here. Let's talk about the president. Nina, he says he's not going to employ any election year gimmicks to win. You believe him?
Well, he was down on his knees with a bunch of 4-year-olds at a nursery school in Baltimore this week. That's not an election
Well,
year
that demonstrates his concern about education.
deep caring. But what we've seen this week, it's very interesting to me to watch the Republican Party now, which will undoubtedly rise again courtesy of the Democrats, as we've seen. But for the moment, we're seeing all the indications of a party that's been in power a long time, which was the Democrats for a long time. It used to be the Democrats who fought all the time, and you can never count on this senator's loyalty or that congressman's loyalty. Now it's the Republicans that are starting to act like that. It's pretty fun to watch for a reporter.
Oh, what was your response to his decision to support the extension of unemployment benefits?
Well,
He's playing salesman. He's pandering like crazy now. And the thing that shows through, he's going to make a State of the Union and propose all sorts of tax cuts to make voters feel better. But he doesn't mean it. He doesn't believe in his own program. And it shows through. Bush sounds silly and tinny and fake when he's saying things that he doesn't really believe. And he sounds very tinny now. what he'd like to do is absolutely nothing. He thinks the responsible thing to do is nothing.
This State of the Union address is being billed as the greatest thing since we have nothing to fear but fear itself.
Well, it's the greatest thing since the last speech of Jimmy Carter. You remember Carter spent
he didn't say molest.
40 days up on the mountain, and then he gave this speech, and it was a dud. And I think the build-up for the State of the Union is a real political disaster for the president, because there is no way in which he can match it. I think there are a lot of expectations. It's going to be a laundry list on domestic issues. I think the one issue that'll be interesting and important is going to be his proposal on nukes. But in this election year, there is no interest whatever in foreign affairs.
People think the war's over. I mean,
Exactly.
they've already discounted that. They assume that we're going to.
So it's not going to have any effect on his prospects.
Why does he paint himself into a corner like this, or allow himself to be painted into a corner?
I think he got forced into a corner. I don't think he allowed it. On one hand, you got to remember, this speech comes at just the time when he's at his low ebb in terms of his popularity in this country, comes in the start of the campaign, gives him that presidential stature element that he's been so lacking. There's a lot here that he needs. He needs to have a big hit in the State of the Union. And he's tried a lot of the gimmicky stuff that he's otherwise eschewed in terms of saying there's no going to be an arms buildup. He's going to give money for the unemployment benefits that, as you rightly point out, Evan, he said, oh, before, who's going to pay for that? And we don't need it. Now he says, okay, go ahead as a political gesture. So he's looking for something, and he needs that State of the Union. And the next day, he needs the budget to be a big hit, because this week the conservatives came into the White House and said, if the budget isn't to our liking, we're going to have a competing GOP House budget that tries to knock the president's budget out of the park.
He told the people in New Hampshire he cares about them. How does that play? What's your reaction to that?
Well, you know, I think that's fine. I actually think that's the message he's got to get through. He's got to let people know that he feels the pain. And there's a lot of mocking and
What he needs
is
is the economy to get better. If the economy goes down the tubes, he's dead. If the economy does come out of a recession, I think he's...
Well, he's not necessarily dead. He's at 19 points or something of approval of his domestic policy, which is, I think, the lowest of anybody except Jimmy Carter in eons. But he's only at 19% against an unnamed Democrat.
Unnamed Democrat.
Now, the minute we name him, bye.
And he could have a name like Tsongas, or he could have a name like Kerry, in which case I think that the president's going to have an easy time.
I think Kerry... I know Kerry doesn't seem to know what he's talking about, and he has this message that he got from Bob Shrum, his political advisor, about being a protectionist. But I still think he can radiate a kind of strength, and that's what presidential elections are about. If you can show some strength and gravity, I think he can do that.
You mentioned the economy. Dan Quayle says the trends are all clearly and strongly in the right direction, and to suggest otherwise is simply Japan bashing. That's what Quayle said this week. And you just sit there and look at me, and you're not moved by this at all.
Well, you know, the economy actually is going in the right direction. I don't think it's a case that the economy is going to fall apart, but it's going to be a slow, gradual thing. But it's just the kind of Japan bashing you were talking about that plays so well. It gives Bush an opportunity to say, I do care. I am out there. I'm putting pressure on the Japanese. And I think this week, after all that's going on with Japan, them calling our workers incompetent and stupid and illiterate.
Yeah.
Yes, illiterate. Suddenly people have a feeling like maybe we should buy American.
Let's be fair. The Japanese parliament, in effect, has apologized. They've agreed to buy 2 Buicks.
Yes, how nice.
Well, they want to buy our baseball teams. That's not fair. Well, I didn't like it when they went to Canada. This is an American game.
It's interesting to me that the polls show that, despite the Japan bashing, people really believe it's our fault. There's been some interesting polling data that shows that, yeah, they're not happy about the Japanese, but they know the real problem is here at home. And
see, right. which makes it what the politicians are doing all the more irresponsible. The Japan, the bashing ads that Kerry is running in New Hampshire, the president's performance in Japan itself, I think, and we saw a result of this in Los Angeles, where a contract was canceled because it had been handed out.
Well, welcome to Washington.
To Japanese.
I mean, the really irresponsible stuff that is an interesting debate up on the Hill is over the tax cuts versus putting more money, the so-called peace dividend, into really building the infrastructure. And this is a debate among Democrats between Benson and Kennedy and others.
But in the long run, Juan, the real problem is going to be if we turn what is now an ally into an enemy over the next decade, it'll be a catastrophic era. There is no need for us to have a great enemy in the world. Our last enemy is dead, and we don't have to go around creating a new one.
See, but I like Evan's Pogo-esque response here that we've seen the enemy, and it's us.
Yeah.
And the American people know that, but still some of them...
That may not stop them from bashing the Japanese.
Yeah.
Well, but the American people don't want to spend money sometimes on the things that would make us more competitive.
The Secretary of State says it is called Operation Provide Hope. The U.S. military will provide 54 plane loads of food and medicine to the former Soviet republics. Some people say it ought to be called Operation Drop in the Bucket, Evan.
Right. It's a Band-Aid on a sucking chest wound. I mean, they have a terrible problem. The real price tag, even short term, is more like $30 billion. A lot of people inside our government think that Yeltsin's not going to make it through the year, and then it's hello, Red Army. It's, you could have a military coup, and you can say goodbye to the peace dividend. I'm not saying that we're going to have an East-West face-off again, but it's going to be hard to cut our defenses heavily if you've got a general sitting in the Kremlin running things.
And what's scandalous about this is that for years we had said, if the Russians do the right thing, at that point we'll step in with massive aid. Well, look what Yeltsin's done. He's raised the prices on everything, including food. He's now cut his defense procurement by 80%, completely starving the military-industrial complex. He essentially has broken up the Soviet Empire, and as of this week, he abolished all restrictions on setting up private business. He's done everything one could possibly ask, and he's hanging by a thread. And we are, as Evan says, sending him Band-Aids, literally.
Well, I don't understand what the president is doing here. He was willing really to put his political neck on the line over China in a situation that is not even remotely comparable to this one.
The difference is money. We don't have the money.
Well, and also his ratings were 90% at the time, and now they're 50%.
It's almost like you want to say,
purely that he's running scared.
Well, that's what leadership is. That's what leadership is.
No,
leadership is saying, this is what I care
We don't
about.
got the dough. The American public's not gonna
Leadership at this point is get reelected. You're not a leader if you're not reelected. And at this point, you've got a guy who says, if I turn my attention to the Soviet Union again, I'm going to get hit with the same switch that said that I was too much involved with foreign affairs and not paying attention to domestic issues, not putting the money back into these United States.
We do not see
You know,
really
this week, Ray Flynn, the mayor of Boston, was here for the mayor's thing, and he said, you see George Bush talking about those Russians. Why doesn't he talk about the homeless and hungry on the streets of our cities?
That's absolutely true, but it is also true that this president was able to fight a war without costing the American public any money.
Well, the Japanese are not going to, the Japanese don't even want to contribute to the proposal that we have now going over because they're mad about islands in the northern part of Japan being controlled by the Russians.
This president said, a couple of weeks ago, said, I'll do whatever I have to do to get reelected.
Well, it's a tragedy that the 1 year that Russia is really at stake, its future is at stake, is a recession and an election year. And because of those two factors together, we're going to get no leadership out of anybody in Washington, and certainly not out of the Bush administration.
Is this a situation that the Americans really could help? I mean, aside from...
We could help because in Poland we have helped. It's a smaller scale in Poland, but we gave them several billions to stabilize currency. If we can stabilize the ruble and prevent hyperinflation, then I think Yeltsin will make it. But for that, he needs a stock of American dollars and Japanese yen, and that he's not getting. He's getting antibiotics.
You know, even this drop in the bucket we couldn't do if George Bush's silence had been followed on this subject. This is money that was put there by Congress, and without him really talking about it.
Evan, you mentioned the Red Army. Talk about that a little more. What's
the State Department view is a logical successor is the Red Army. A little chaos in the streets, a few food riots. The Army says they got to seize control.
We're back to the good old days?
Well, we're not back to communism. We're back to Chile. We're back to an army in control that sort of allows
totalitarianism, I meant, yeah.
Right.
And then what about the nukes? Now, I saw the United States is going to hire a bunch of scientists.
That was how
nobody else
that was
would get a hold of
Genscher's proposal this week. Genscher proposed that we just go out and buy them.
That's a great idea.
Buy the people who have the knowledge of nuclear science.
We're buying 2,000, that leaves 8,000 untaken care of.
But you can't buy the Army, to get back to Evan's point. And the Army was in there this week complaining about lack of housing, lack of funding for food, and why is the Army being abandoned? We didn't do anything. That sounds very ominous.
But Yeltsin's not stupid. He's doubling the pay to Army. He's taking all the money out of weapons and new procurement and spending it on soldiers because he knows that if they're hungry, he might have a revolt on his hands.
Meanwhile, in some of the other republics, you have bloodshed, and I wonder how much of that is going to spread.
Well, you know, we have always, I think, conned ourselves into believing that if we didn't have communism, we would have democracy. And that's not necessarily so, and we're seeing that played out in some of these republics where tyrants are fighting tyrants, and the choices are just between tyrants.
When this thing first began to unravel, we heard here more than once that it was possible we would look back on the Cold War as the good old days. So.
Oh, no, I don't think so.
You don't
I think
so?
If this doesn't end up as a catastrophe, it can, But if Yeltsin can hang on for a year or two, and he stabilizes it through the worst period, I think we will emerge at the other end with a weakened Russia, perhaps not a democracy, but not an enemy, not a blood enemy as it was for 50 years. And that's an absolute radical change in the world. I don't believe that we're ever going to look at the Cold War as good old days. Remember the Cuban Missile Crisis. That was not good old days.
I hope you're right. I hope those nukes don't end up in, 50 more countries with a bunch of terrorist Gaddafis all over the world threatening us, and we've got completely irrational enemies. I mean, I see the virtue of your argument. I'm not 100% persuaded it's right. I hope to God you're right.
This week was the 19th anniversary of Roe v. Wade, right, Tina?
Right, Nina.
Okay. I mean, Nina. Tina's the producer. Nina's
right,
the...
right.
I've been doing that all day. Sorry. 70,000 opponents of abortion gathered here in Washington to talk about that and to try to influence the Supreme Court and the administration and so forth. Where is this going as a political issue? Is it still a major factor here?
It's a tremendous factor, and it's got every political consultant in town on his edge of his or her seat, because this is one that can explode right in the middle of the campaign. You had George Bush on the line talking to those 70,000 people by phone. You had every Democratic nominee over at the National Abortion Rights League dinner. And everybody's kind of, on the Democratic side, hoping this is the one pitfall that George Bush can't escape. If you go back with Lee Atwater, this is the one where Lee Atwater says, we lose the swing vote, we lose the libertarian edge of the Republican Party, people who believe in social freedoms but might be conservative on defense and tax issues.
Well, Mr. Bush sent him a message. He sent him a recorded message.
Well, but people really don't vote for president based on abortion. I don't think there's much indication that that's happened in the past, and in the middle of a very severe economic recession, I would doubt even more severely that that would happen now. Where it hurts the Republican Party is in the so-called realignment, because the polling data shows that it's young people who feel most strongly about this, young men in particular, even more strongly than young women. And it hurts them with local offices and maybe congressional offices, state legislative offices.
What is the non-political Supreme Court going to do with this issue?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm pretty sure that they will cut back on Roe significantly. Whether the court actually says the magic words, today we reverse Roe versus Wade, I don't know. Because this case does not present a state law that bans abortion completely. So the court could dodge that bullet a little bit.
You're talking about the Pennsylvania law.
The Pennsylvania law. The court could dodge that bullet a little bit, but to think that the court is not going to hand down a major ruling on abortion is a little bit like saying, well, I'm going to the bank, but I'm not going to do anything that has to do with money.
I think Nina is right that the abortion issue is a realignment issue, and it's a gradual one, except I think there can be one exception. If it does rule in the summertime for an outright overturning of Roe, I think it becomes a major, major presidential issue, because then it's pinned on the Republicans who packed this particular court. Which is why I think that the court, which does look at election results, I think is not going to issue a blanket overturning. I think it will rule narrowly, and it'll postpone the real decision about overturning Roe into the next presidency.
So the court is not apolitical.
The court's completely political. They read the newspapers just like everybody else. I mean, I think they'll try to punt, not say the magic words this time, just so that Harry Blackman gets death threats. They care about this.
I'm really not so sure. This is a court that is now composed of people who have a very definite judicial philosophy, which is that this is an electoral issue, not a judicial issue. And I think they may have some self-pride about that. I realize I'm in the minority saying this, even among scholars who watch the court all the time. So, don't take what I say.
The Congress could solve this whole thing by coming up with a law, and there is that talk that there's a law proposal on the books, and that could get put on Bush's desk, and he would have to veto it.
That's right.
And again, it seems to me the economy is going to be, slightly increasing, and people are going to focus on this as, look at what the Republicans have done. This is the great hope of the Democratic Party in 1992.
At the very least, it could give the Republicans a messy convention. I mean, they could have, those conventions will be the kind that Democrats used to have, because there are going to be a lot of...
Messy for them, fun for us.
Yeah.
I think if the Supreme Court ruling on this particular case is narrow, it remains a second or third tier issue.
All right. I guess this belongs in this format. Magic Johnson may or may not play in the Summer Olympics. And the Australians reportedly said that they didn't want to play with a guy who has the AIDS, the AIDS virus, not necessarily has AIDS. What was your reaction to that?
I think the Australians ought to be kicked out of the Olympics if they boycott Magic Johnson on the grounds of ignorance and prejudice. There is no way in which one can catch AIDS from a basketball game. Even family members of AIDS sufferers have no reported cases of people who are catching it from casual contact. So it's not going to happen on a court. I think it's a mini scandal, and at least the American team ought to stick with Magic Johnson and say it's a matter of principle.
Yeah, but how would you feel getting slammed on and embarrassed in front of an international audience? That's what they want to avoid with Magic.
Well, the Australian doctor said that if, you know, it's a rough sport, and if there was an open cut and there was a flow of blood and so forth.
The Australian doctor, at least from what I read, is wrong.
He's very wrong. The NFL,
he doesn't know what he's talking about.
The National Football League, where they really slam into each other, has no such policy.
Speaking of that, where is Carl Rowan this week? Our investigative reporter caught up with him at Dulles International Airport.
I'm playing hooky today. I mean, this is a time when you put world politics and local politics aside and go into the real world of football.
Now, Gordon Peterson's not going to be too happy about that. His Inside Washington's going to be missing a player.
Well, if he calls my house today, he'll find me missing.
Yeah, I did, and he was.
He's gone.
Anybody want to make a prediction?
Well, didn't Charles predict Red Sox in 6 this year? I think he meant Redskins stick it to the Bills. That's it. That's it.
Red Sox in 6.
Nina doesn't like football. Next time I'll get your name right. That's Inside Washington. Thanks for being with us. See you next week.
Acquisition of this program was made possible by Friends of Iowa Public Television.
Lee DeForest, Edwin Howard Armstrong, David Sarnoff, radio pioneers, men who transformed American lives but shattered their own.
WJAR, Providence. Who knows what evil lurks in the hearts of men? The shadow knows.
Jason Robards narrates Empire of the Air, The Men Who Made Radio, a new film from Ken Burns, who produced the Civil War.
Enjoy this all-new Ken Burns special, Wednesday at 8 here on Iowa Public Television.
Just an ordinary day in Ireland, except that the Irish eyes are smiling for 75 photojournalists clicking away all over the Emerald Isle. Join us as they capture a day in the life of Ireland next time on Travels.
Monday at 7 here on Iowa Public Television.
The war? They've started it without us. I'll make a nice cup of tea.
Masterpiece Theater presents a comic and moving drama of wartime and romance.
You know where Hitler made his big mistake? Siding with Mussolini instead of you lot.
And A Nightingale Sang on Masterpiece Theater.
Sunday night at 9 here on Iowa Public Television.
Tonight on the Vicks Jazz Festival, the Cakewalkin' Jazz Band. The Cakewalkin' Jazz Band is one of the country's finest Dixieland jazz bands and swings with the inspiration of great musicians. So join us later tonight at 10:30 for the Bix Jazz Festival with the Cakewalkin' Jazz Band right here on Iowa Public Television.
Iowa Public Television. TV worth